you all for coming.
Greetings. Greetings. It's great to be here. It's a bit of a mystery as to why I'm here, because I hope I won't mess things up for Ramesh. He's a very kind man. He was very kind to invite me as interlocutor. As Kelly mentioned, we actually did meet via that Zapatista spaceship. So I guess it was meant to be that we should meet. And it is true, we do enjoy talking a lot. We spend a lot of time speaking. But I know how much he's been working towards this book, and it's amazing that it's out, Ramesh. And the timing, I think, could not be more interesting now that we have a Twitter presidency. So the world outside of the internet seems to have been molded quite massively by these technologies, and it's so remarkable that Ramesh has been investigating this globally. Ramesh, it's an honor to be here with you. So I don't know if you want to tell a little bit about the general impulse of why you thought this book needed to happen, and then maybe we could take it from there.
Well, the book is really, it's come out of my heart and my work and my intellectual, political, and personal practice. I'm a former engineer who studied engineering and went to MIT for graduate school, and in the processes of building the systems, right, that have come to define and shape our world, right? Like Google was sort of being talked about by us at MIT in the early 2000s. We were building platforms that were sort of like Google. We were building platforms that came to resemble platforms like Facebook. There was this sense that I had of this question of who are we going to serve? Whose voices are we going to support, and whose voices are we not going to support? As we are in these incredibly privileged, powerful institutions and building these tools that we only prophesized, we imagined would come to actually connect and fundamentally transform our world, right? And I was thinking about how the story of politics today in our country and in so many parts of the world is partly a story about the internet, right? So I wrote this book out of a sense and feeling I had that I wanted to think about how to develop these newer technologies in ways that really serve and support diverse cultures, diverse voices, diverse perspectives. And I was thinking about this idea and this concern I had, while I was in graduate school, that we were basically just building these gee whiz technologies, from algorithms to systems to interfaces to tools. And we somehow assumed that as we just spread them all over the world, that we would bring the world closer in our own image. And I sort of felt that's kind of not the way this thing should be, right? We build technologies that resemble us as humans. Humans create technologies. But which humans are behind those desks, right? And so all my work and the stories of this book are stories of collaboration with diverse cultures and communities all over the world, where together we're reimagining technology. We're reimagining almost every component of technology that one can think of, from how you build a network to how you design a system, to how you kind of protect yourself from surveillance, to how you empower a political and social movement. There's stories in there from the Egyptian Revolution, where I was doing my field work. So the book, even in this current moment, where I think a lot of us are sort of bummed out about the political environment in this country, this book is meant to be felt and experienced in a very positive sense, at least by me, because it's a book of stories of empowerment and collaboration and mobilization. So I'm really grateful that you all could come, and I look forward to us all having a conversation today. Rather than me reading this book to you, I will just tell you some stories and hopefully interact with you around it. So,
yay!
Thanks.
Glad you touch upon the diversity issue, because that's one of the first things I wanted to bring up. In the book you mentioned, bring up the concept of deep diversity. And as we well know, a massive tree plantation campaign does not produce a forest, as much as the release of 500 jaguars does not create a jungle. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk about a little bit the parallels between the realities of biodiversity on Earth and the realities of technological diversity in human cultures. Because I remember when I was a kid, I say, for instance, I went out with my parents, the conversation would never be, hey, if you want to call me on the AT&T telephone. We'd be like, get in touch with me, So it's interesting, now it seems to be every time that we're talking about how we get in touch with each other, that we have to name the technologized vehicle through which we are having this communication. And are humans using fewer and fewer ways to communicate with each other in platforms? Is that a good thing, bad thing? This kind of like...
So I've been doing a lot of media outreach this week, and I was on the Young Turks and KCRW over the last couple of days, and I mentioned this piece that came out in the New York Times called AI, so artificial intelligence, AI's white guy problem. And that's sort of a catchy title for a phenomena that I kind of mentioned earlier, which is when we create and design systems, we often create and design technologies based on who we are, right? And so it just so happens to be, and this is not meant as a sort of diss per se, that the people running these Silicon Valley companies tend to come out of this sort of background, right? They tend to see the world in ways that are sort of built upon an experience that comes out of like science and technology, which has always been kind of coming out of the Enlightenment and European era thinking. So I think you all know this, but right now in the world has about 7,000 languages, and it's estimated that about half of those languages are going to disappear within the next 100 years. I mean, you all know about climate change and sort of the astonishing potential loss that's ongoing and continuing of plants and animals in our world. And so the question is that I write about in this book is, why is that occurring, right? Like, why is all of this vanishing, and why does it matter that these forms of diversity are vanishing? And it's not because like someone black or someone brown or someone of this or that culture is disappearing. It's not in and of itself. It's because in diversity lies our strength. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean simple identity politics that I describe in this book. I actually talk about very different ways of seeing the world, like very different ways of experiencing and talking about something. So this is a word I use in the book that I call ontology. Basically, what happens when we come into conversation with people who are different than us, who might see something in a very different way, and how can we work together across our differences rather than flatten our differences? So what does this all have to do with technology? It has a lot to do with technology, right? Because there's like 1.8 billion people in the world that are Facebook users, and about the same number that are Google users, and about 4 billion people in the world out of 7 billion total have access to the internet. So it's like, whose internet, right? And so the question that I'm asking in the book is, can we think of an internet that doesn't flatten our voices so we have to simply subscribe to invisible protocols that are built into technology, right? Like I put something on Facebook, God knows where it goes and who sees it, right? Breitbart is the most popular political news source on Facebook. How many of you have seen Breitbart posts on your Facebook feed? Like half, one and a half. That's a half. Out of the whole room, right? Did you know that? So like what I'm trying to say here is not that we want more Breitbart in our life. I'm saying that we need to figure out ways to develop tools and systems that get us into better conversations with one another across our diversity, across our differences. And so the book is full of, like, again, all these stories of me hanging out, learning, collaborating with Native American communities, Egyptian activists, peoples and communities in South Asia. And in all of these projects, I'm trying to think about how, with these people directly, with these communities, often that I'm invited to work with, we develop and design technologies that support those ways of knowing, if you will, those traditions, those belief systems so we can bring them, when appropriate, into conversation with one another. Right? I mean, if that doesn't make sense, like, I will continue to clarify that. But that's really the charge of the book, right? Like, how do we think of an internet that actually counters this astonishing loss in linguistic, cultural, and, biodiversity as well? How do we think of technology in that way, where it's not connectivity at the cost of diversity?
Right. Another thing that, for me, is central is the idea of depth, or historical depth, like how far back in time things go. And so I had said, there are concepts of thoughts that which are articulated so clearly that once you come in contact with them, just the mere fact of coming in contact with them is liberating. One that comes to mind is Angela Davis' prison industrial complex, which changed the ways we think about the United States, justice, and slavery. So a concept in your book that had a profound impact on me was this recency bias. As we see how Twitter, you don't need to know what somebody said last week, you just need to know what it said yesterday. So this recency bias, when applied to 21st century technologies and the corporations who develop and copyright them, make me ask, can one really understand a tree focusing exclusively on the latest flower to bloom, on the latest leaf to gain airborne qualities? Is there such a thing as a geek who is into roots? So how, that's my question, how it seems like we're coming ever closer to the surface, to the extent that the shiny screen is now a surface that is meant to be possible to encompass the entire complexity and depth of human experience. So I would like for you, if you could address this recency bias and how we can break from being stuck in the present moment and actually, going.
Do any of you want to guess how many years old Google is? Just about 15. They say 18, but let's say 15. Facebook's about 15 as well, right? Yet these tools and companies and the platforms and services that they provide have come to dominate our world to such an extent. I was mentioning 1.8 billion people, right, that are more or less users. They tend to be the wealthier people in the world, right? They've come to define our experiences of what is, right? You only know what is based on what's visible to you, right? So this term recency bias that I describe, it's a term that basically means we often privilege and pay attention more to the stuff that's newer, right? Especially with new technology, right? The technologies that come into our life have such a seductive appeal to them, partly because they're new, that we sometimes forget what might be at the root of that tree, right? Mm-hmm. And the root of the tree, for me, is not technology. The root of the tree, for me, is about culture and diversity and voice. And so that is fundamentally the argument of the book. It's clearly culture and technology have a relationship with one another, right? We build and shape technologies, and technologies also shape and impact us. But insofar as it's possible, it's incredibly important to me, and I try to introduce some examples of this from different parts of the world, that we think about technology as not as fixed or universal or dominant. For God's sakes, these platforms are only 15 years old, and they've changed a lot, right? They're changing all the time. So there's clearly some adaptivity, if you will, going on in these opaque places. They're in Silicon Valley, but you know what I mean. These places where these technologies are being designed and developed. And instead, I'm saying, instead of just simply accepting and taking these platforms for granted as they stand, we need to think about these platforms as adaptive and shaping themselves in relation to our own communities, our own user communities, our own cultures, right? And so on every level, from the political information you get to how a culture is or is not articulated through a technology, there is a possibility and a lot of the book kind of concerns me thinking as a designer, right? Like I'm trained as a designer in my graduate work to build these platforms and technologies with different communities, right? Like, so everything from like how you design a database, how you design an interface, how you design an algorithm, how you design like who has access to what information in what contexts, all of that is open for us to take control over. And it's high time, and it's sad that at this political moment, like this argument is really resonating and circulating, but it's time, you know? So the Angela Davis point is, I was really fortunate to see Angela Davis in person with Shama, my partner, in Chile, and she was talking about this term that she said, the tyranny of the universal. Mm-hmm. And so, like, what does that mean? Well, on some level, like, universal sounds good, right? Like, you know, it's good to be connected. It's good to feel part of a larger entity, part of a larger system. But generally speaking, that which is universal tends to be defined by those who have power, right? I think most of this crowd's going to agree with me, but when we say all lives matter versus Black lives matter, you're actually reinforcing a system where black lives haven't necessarily mattered quite as much as all lives, right? The other lives. So that's what she was referring to when she said those words to us. And I was thinking so deeply about that, and I was thinking about this myth of universality around the internet. You know, this idea like, it's universal, it's everywhere, it's accessible, all we have to do is access it. But like, whose internet, right? Who is it supporting? So those are the questions that I'm just trying to grapple with through all my work, and I'm dealing with it to some extent in this book. Yeah. So.
You mentioned also the world listening versus world making, like the way in which these new technologies are, the narrative surrounding these new technologies is always about how they're going to rid us from the stale, the slow, old world and deliver us into the shiny and fast future. So it's always a narrative about how the world will never be the same now that we have this tool, you know. So Ramesh talks about the importance of world listening rather than world making. And I remember noticing that having come from Europe, from Portugal in high school, you have to learn 2 foreign languages. And we sort of have a joke that says, you know, multilingual, trilingual, bilingual, American. This is, and you know, in the time that I've been here, it's interesting that my friends have like, oh, I've learned. Do you know Photoshop? Do you know HTML? Do you know? It's like, and they've like gone through this effort to learn so many languages that allows them to talk with machines. And I've run into such few people that tell me, you know what, I'm learning Mandarin, or I'm learning Spanish, or I'm learning, you know, Tzotzil or Tzeltal, or, you know, or I'm learning, God forbid, Dine or Oloni, you know. So, yeah, the importance of listening, you know. Recently I was doing an event that involved recording, and I was trying to get a sound person to record the event. And I was having a hard time, so I had to ask several people. And it was really beautiful because somebody that I would ask would say, oh, no, I can't do it, but I'll recommend some people. And everybody would send me like a list of 8 or 6 names. And I was like, wow, this is such like a neat, mutually supportive community. And then I thought, well, maybe it's because they are people who believe that listening is important, you know, because they record sound. So this narrative about the world changing, for me, a screaming example was the Arab Spring, where it was like, Arab Spring, people in the Arab world are using the internet to create revolutions, and spring became fall, and hope became incredible oppression, and liberation became like torturing, and 400 people being condemned to death at the same time, and all of a sudden nobody talks about the Arab Spring. It's like when technology seemed to be delivering this future, and then the archaic past actually is so much mightier than this child technology. All of a sudden, nobody's interested to talk about it. Why aren't we talking about Egypt anymore? You were there, and I would love for you to share.
Yeah, no, it's so It's such a great point. I mean, I want to just show you a couple pictures to kind of talk about what's going on in this book in relation to what you're saying, Rigo. Okay, so this is an image some of you might have seen. It's an image from Standing Rock. It was up on The Guardian. And you sort of see these sorts of clashes that are occurring, right? I mean, and this was before Trump took office, so, who knows what's going on right now. And I was speaking to some friends who are native leaders, and they're connected with folks Standing Rock Sioux, and they were explaining to me that the water protectors are not just seeing this as a matter of private property, right? That's a very Western framing around these kinds of clashes. It's not my water versus your water, or my land versus your land. They see themselves as protecting the water for 7 generations, so they're like the ancestors for 7 generations. It's amazing, right? Like I don't think of myself in those ways, but that's what culture is, like those differences. And I was just thinking about, like, why is it that so few of us know that fact? Why is the internet not empowering that sort of form, those forms of deeper cultural dialogue? What I call deep diversity, right? That's the term you were mentioning. So the thing and that's why this idea that like technologies are making the world, but these technologies themselves are just being constantly designed, tweaked, engineered, and manipulated in new ways, but we don't quite have power or knowledge of how or in what ways. Instead, there's a whole other approach, right? And like the book is full of these stories of like another approach, and this approach is like sitting with people, figuring out how to keep your grant, because I'm funded by the research grants, some of you know. Keep your grant while like not following these deadlines per se, and kind of working with people and sort of being okay with the unexpected. And I just want to show you a couple images of this. So that's an image of all these chains of production that go into some of the technologies we take for granted, an image from Foxconn in China where these iPhones are assembled and other devices, and an image from the Congo of a Congolese miner who's mining for coltan. This is another Guardian images here. And these are images from Tahrir Square, which I'll speak about later, but I just want to show this. Okay, this is a lot. Chapters 3 and 4 in the book describe times I spent, matter of years, off and on with Native American communities, and the process of listening, or one might just say observing and sitting and kind of letting what is revealed to you be revealed, like when it's revealed to you, and just sort of being at peace with that, is like a big part of the book that I describe. It's like a big part of like what I was trying to learn myself. I don't think I had these skills before doing this kind of work. I have them much more so now, and I have a long way to go. But what's going on here, this is a group of Zuni elders who invited me into a room, and they said, we're going to examine a map in a museum. I'm like, that's a map? That's an indigenous map. But if you notice, they're all looking at it at the same time, because they have to collectively look at this map to make meaning out of it. Like, that's a concept that like totally escaped my world when I was like designing technology in graduate school. I thought it's like one person per computer, right? It's totally different model, totally different cultural model, cultural way of experiencing knowledge and information. I'm going to give you another example. Did you know that this is how my friends at Zuni use the system we designed together? Do you see how many people there are in the room? So there is a number of people in the room, and they all have to be in the room looking at the same screen, some at the same time, and some have to actually leave the room at various points. So they're looking at images of cultural objects, and they're talking about those images. And and I described this, we developed some digital culture systems, digital cultural heritage systems. But when they look at these images, they have to sit with each other. They have to collectively experience these images because they have to have conversations about these images for these images, and therefore the knowledge that these images convey to actually be meaningful. So people at various times here will put their fingers in their ears. because they're not supposed to know certain things. People will leave the room and other people will come in the room. So there's like all of these cultural and social, and the term we use is practices, but there are all these forms of activity and performance and ritual that are part of the process of knowing, right? The process of being, that's culture in so many ways. And in their best moments, this is really like what I'm arguing in the book, in their best moments, technologies facilitate these types of activities. It's not just all of us. Like, I have this image in the in the beginning of the book of Mark Zuckerberg, right, from Facebook, addressing a group of developers at a virtual reality conference, and everybody has an Oculus Rift on, and he's like the only one without an Oculus Rift on. You all saw this image, right? And I was like, this is the society of the spectacle here. But basically, that's one way of collectively experiencing technology, right? Where you're all atomized with your devices. And here's another way. And so, like, the only thing I'm trying to get at here is that's kind of what I mean by, like, world listening. And that's just like a process. It's a constant process, right? It's an ethnographic process in my case. A process of, like, being taught the unexpected. The book is full of stories that are, like, hilarious at times. Of me being put in my place by these communities, and I can't tell you how much that has influenced me and like has completely changed who I am and what I do. The process of learning and world listening. Yeah.
It's amazing that you mentioned elders. I think it's impossible to talk about indigenous world without talking about elders, right? And whenever you buy into this narrative that these new technology companies say that the world used to be whatever, slow, and now it's fast and better. So why care about the past if the past is just like an impoverished version of what the present is, and definitely even more so the future. So why listen to old people? They were using phones when it was plugged into the wall. Man, shit, who cares what they think? And whereas if you are in an indigenous context, you know that that's who you care about what they think the most is the old folks who have been around. And I think the first time that I noticed, at least, that indigenous world sort of becoming present via or appearing in the radar of these technologies was when Native people did the water challenge. When it was like you would get in the water and do a little video and then send it to your cousin or your auntie and your uncle, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, did you hear about the water challenge? And friends that I knew, Native folks from Northern California that I've known for 2 or 3 decades, they'd never mentioned the internet before, but now here's Brian Tripp going into the river,
Yeah.
And it was beautiful that this technology was used as a way to invite each other and demonstrate that this biological body that we have, we can take it into the water, and now here we have the water protectors, so it's continuity is not a failure, right? Yeah. And I believe that these new technologies are always wanting to disrupt this continuity and having us on the edge of our seat, thinking only about tomorrow.
Can I mention something about that? Yeah. I published a piece on quartz this week, which is like an Atlantic, sister piece, and I describe like what happens when you search for information online. Like, you all know this, right? Like, it just relates in some way about knowledge, right? And how knowledge circulates on the internet and through search and social media platforms. And I was searching. I was describing, like, I was searching for. In the book, I described this. I was searching for like Zuni pottery, right? Like, and I've been working with the Zuni community for 10 years, the Native American community that the book has a whole chapter on. And the first site that came back to me was eBay. And trust me, like, dude, the Zuni are not into their pottery being bought and sold on eBay. I think you can tell. And that's not because it's like their pottery, right? Again, it's not like a private property rights issue. It's actually because the pottery has cultural and sometimes spiritual meaning, right? So those are and I really do believe that if those forms of knowledge were more part of our digital conversations, that people would interact with these objects, for example, in ways that were more respectful. It's not a radical proposal here. It's just a proposal to open up the black boxes, right? Like open up the choices that go into ordering the world in the ways that are ordered through these technologies. So I just want to like show that. I'll show you the screenshot too. So, just to prove it.
Social media is a word that I would like you to, because I know we've talked a lot about that and what does it mean. And again, because I know that Ramesh's research in his lifetime has been spent a lot searching for all knowledge amidst this hysteria around new technologies. But in January 1994, the world was surprised with the arrival of the Zapatista, right? Zapatistas in southeastern Mexico. I was in Portugal at the time, was front page news. And so it was very surprising that this indigenous group had risen up in arms. But another thing that was very surprising about them is that they would issue these communiques from the jungle, and the communiques would be in Barcelona, Paris, New York, New Delhi, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires at the same time. And I was like, whoa, how do they do that? Turns out they were using this thing called the internet. And you know, one sort of assault on someone would happen in Chiapas, and people would know it all over the world at the same time. So this was early 1994. Just for a comparison, Yahoo, which is like a dinosaur by Silicon Valley standards, was founded in March 1995. Right? So different people have different ideas of what the social is. Like, you know, somebody's idea of the social might be, I'm going to ride from Alaska to Argentina on my bicycle. You know, somebody else's idea of the social might be, I'm going to develop an app and how to meet at the nearest French restaurant. I don't know. My question, I guess, is if you could address a little bit how somehow the word social got insinuated into something that was clearly, maybe if anything, was asocial.
Yeah. So one of the parts of the book in chapter 5, I describe some stories of actually visiting some of the caracoles, which is like the district offices where the Zapatista communities are based. This is in Chiapas in southern Mexico, and it's totally interesting. And like every like political and social movement has layers to it, right? And like different technologies and different tools like support different layers of what a movement is. So do you guys think that at that time in like 1994 the Zapatistas were themselves online in the jungles of Chiapas? No way, no. But they were figuring out ways through allies and, you know, through their urban connections to publicize and globalize and spread information about their movement doing through Usenet fora. Remember Usenet? It's like that was what was being done. Like alt.hippie, alt.peace, alt.environment. That's what it used to be organized around, the alt dot. We all, so I remember this. It's and these are like community fora, right? Where they were taking it's a very local struggle, right? Like a place-based struggle about their land and their history and their relationship with the Mexican government, and they globalized it so much so that Marcos, one of the head spokespeople, Subcomandante Marcos, it was actually seen as like a soap opera icon in Mexico within like 6 months of them doing this, right? Like, so he became an icon, like a heartthrob in Mexican like kind of bourgeoisie spaces soon after that. So I just think that's really interesting, because how are the Zapatistas themselves, how are they communicating? It's CB radio, right? And it's like, that's a network technology too, right? And so like the point really that I was sort of trying to address with this in the book is, like, again, just like my call for us to think about culture and diversity and communities as we develop and design technology, let's also, when we tell a story of some phenomena, let's remember that it's like social and political and cultural, and then think about media and technology like in a more like grounded way, right? So That's really like what I was trying to get at with that. So when, we know that social media are social in some ways and not social in other ways, but it depends on the affordances of the different platforms and what we're talking about and in what context. But like in the context of like the Arab Spring, where the book describes some of my stories, like wandering around Egypt between 2011 and 2013, being like talking with people telling me like, tell Facebook to like, lower the price of tomatoes in my neighborhood. And, like just these kinds of ideas of what Facebook is, right? So in the context of that work, I recognized that here's a small group of activists that were using social media technologies, but they weren't using it to mobilize and rally necessarily people in their own country. They were using it to globalize their story. Right? It's like very similar in many ways to the Zapatista story. So they were using it as a social mode of information dissemination, right? Like they were using it to kind of hijack media and shape media and journalists who could then tell stories about their movement that were both global as well as on their local TV channels. So like that's one layer, but then they were building and organizing locally in lots of other ways, like posters on the walls, mosques, neighborhood councils, familial networks, labor movement networks. So like that's the amazing part, right? Isn't that a way more interesting story than saying like, a bunch of people were on Facebook and then a revolution happened? It's like so much more interesting, and like it blew me away. Like I promised I would show this image. This is Khaled Abdullah right here. And he's one of my like informants, so to speak. Like I've written quite a bit about him in some of my recent pieces. And he's the actor from The Kite Runner. And he's also in that film The Square. And what's he doing here? He's not like behind his computer. Do you see this? It's collective, just like the Native American example. So like he's taking content that he's seeing on YouTube and digital platforms and screening it like on walls all over the country. Not just him, but it became like a decentralized practice where people all over the country just started to DIY, like shoot video and project it. And at any given time, there were 600 of these things happening in Egypt in any given like couple day period. It was just happening and spreading. It was a viral model. It's like the internet without any fiber optic cables or wires, It's like a network. And so the point I just want to make is like that to me is social, right? Like because that story is not defined solely by the piece of media content that's being projected. It's defined by who's there, what are they there for? Like what are they doing with each other when they're experiencing it? So it's like that's social for me, right? And I just think I really believe that like Facebook and Google and Twitter can empower those forms of sociality. I just think that there's a little bit of a weird myth that like we're socializing simply by being stuck in our own echo chambers, if you will. All right, cool.
So I'll ask you my last question.
Last one, and then we'll open it up, please.
Yeah. Because in the end of the book, you kind of come back to this central question that is, whose global village is it? Whose global village? And the word village, I think, conjures up in our mind like a friendly social space, like a village where you know everybody, where everybody's cool with each other. But so I kind of, since you've challenged me to do this, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I kind of thought about, I feel like we live more in a global villanage. Villanage, Villanage, yeah, where the most popular people are the villains, You have Duterte, you have Trump, you have Putin, you have
This is why
Temer.
I asked him to do this with me, by the way.
You have Temer, and all of a sudden it's like a global villanage where it seems like, there's not even mercenaries anymore. They're just contractors, right? So how did we get here? How did the village get? How did village life get hijacked by the villains? This
is like the bummer part. I mean, I kind of went there a little bit earlier, but this is so. I'm writing now like quite a bit about like our political environment in this country and how the internet has been weaponized to support, this sort of like fascist, movement that we see underway, and so So all right, so like the ways, like the story of, for me, the story of like American politics and American presidential politics, the last like 3 rounds was partly a story about the internet, right? Like how data was collected, how data was monetized, how data was analyzed, the platforms by which political participation occurred, and we know that story with Obama and Howard Dean before that, which is like in the primary campaign against Kerry. This is a really interesting moment right now where the villainage has occurred. I'll just say the villain villains have emerged partly because of their ability to exploit the ways in which information circulates through our social media platforms, and specifically the algorithms that are the ways that they saturate these systems and they determine what is and is not visible to whom in what manners. Okay, and so there's a lot of money and support that's I've been reading about this quite a bit over the last few months, but by all means my work is not complete in this, that has gone into what we call weaponizing the fake news phenomenon, right? So basically what's occurring is there are incredible ways in which groups like Breitbart were funded and supported by individuals like a guy named Robert Mercer, is really important to know, who was a natural language processing AI guy at IBM. So incredibly brilliant, technology guy who has supported and funded through his hedge fund, not just him, but other people as well, various platforms that are collecting incredible amounts of data on about 220 plus million Americans. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of data points. Some say hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of data points that are being collected about all of that. So that influences a strategy where you can manipulate the so-called global village to actually target people with ads and route how content is flowing and distributing through networked algorithms. So any network architecture can be exploited if you know the logic and can manipulate the movement and mobility of information within those networks. So I think it's an incredibly interesting moment where we're at, where the ability to control and manipulate how information flows and visibility and invisibility through Facebook, which is the place people go now for news. Right? I mean, it might be stuff we post on Facebook, and almost nobody here saw Breitbart articles on Facebook. But why is Breitbart so incredibly powerful on Facebook? It's the most popular political news source on Facebook, even though none of us have seen it, or 1.5 people, I think, because the mechanisms by which its visibility is flowing is being determined by these, I guess, local villains, national villains. So it's, if there ever was a time to take back the internet in relation to people's grassroots cultural voices, I think now is a good time. CNN seems to be on board with that. The New York Times seems to be on board with that. And when they're on board with things, because they're being discredited and shut out, literally, right? And part of the reason I feel like they're being shut out is Trump and his administration can get away with it because they're in control on the social media platforms. So, time to take back the global village, huh?
Indeed. Well, thank you, Ramesh, so much. So then, if people, I don't know, do you?
Yeah, we have a lot of time.
The mic, or how do you?
Let's just see if there are any questions.
There we go.
Yeah, thanks, Cece. And we have a half hour or so, or whatever. Yeah.
So my question is, I'm one of the people who have never heard of Breitbart until you mentioned it. Now, would you say, in terms of taking back the internet, is it my responsibility to seek that out? And as an individual, because I'm not an information technologist,
sure,
is it my responsibility to seek that out and penetrate the echo chamber that I'm already in to learn about those? I mean, would that be on a mission list for me to say, I'm going to go after 10 news platforms that are very conservative, so I'm rightfully informed? Is that what you're suggesting?
Not exactly. No, but it's such a great question. It's because it's not clear exactly what we should or could do. I mean, we should just start simply by not not completely assuming that the world of Facebook that's presented to us is the same world that's presented, obviously, to many more people than ourselves, right? Like, we start with that. I think it's important to understand, definitely, the conversations and discourses that are emerging through these sorts of sites. These are, little sites. And one of the ways in which these guys that I was mentioning were able to weaponize the visibility of search results was by creating lots of small little websites that link to one another, because backlinking influences the visibility of content on a search algorithm. But I think it's about us trying to do whatever we can to pressure, first of all, these platforms and these companies to explain to us why content is chosen, to give us some possibilities of browsing outside of that. I was reading the Zuckerberg manifesto this morning, and it doesn't really deal with these issues the way it should, in my opinion. Mark Zuckerberg wrote a manifesto, by the way, in case you didn't know. And there's some interesting aspects to it. I think more than anything, we need to think about how to get outside of these bubbles in as many ways as possible, that by not necessarily relying on technologies that are producing these bubbles. So, there are some experiments that we can do around this. I shot a video with Fusion where I had a very, very nice lady who's a declared Trump supporter show her newsfeed with us, and I kind of talked through my newsfeed, and we looked at the two in tandem. And so those are the kinds of things that we can do, because I think a number of people who voted for Trump and are supportive of President Trump still are upset about the same issue. So there's something that we can align around here. So there's a lot more to this, though. Yeah.
Follow-up question is just that, is it enough, because it's all algorithmic, and so I'm in an echo chamber just because of the way that I've looked at things in my natural, organic way, but if I were to start following Breitbar, would I crack into a whole other code and algorithm?
It may or may not happen. It's definitely worth, that was the last point, thank you for reminding me. We should experiment with our own sort of digital presence, and that could be also figuring out times when we're going to be careful about what we put online, but also figuring out what we choose to like and in what ways. I think we should constantly be playing with these algorithms, right? It's sad that that's like kind of the only place we're at with power, like as like mice in a laboratory. But we're going to push further, right? And now that the mainstream media is on this side, like the side of critique that like a lot of us have had, from a more, So like there's a possibility to make this happen. I feel optimistic about it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
No, I don't need the microphone. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I'll talk loud. I want to ask you, to what degree is the Western hegemony over the internet, as you have seen it, right? To what degree is it just a new application of existing power structure that existed before the internet was around? And I kind of want to back that up with an observation that I recently had with my daughter, who wanted to watch a documentary about Mughal architecture culminating in the construction of Taj Mahal. So on YouTube, I found her one. There's a bunch of them, right? And she watched it. I watched it with her, and practically everyone who was interviewed in the documentary were white people. Usually either European, North American, often French. Not a single person from India or from Iran, so on and so forth.
Dude. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But that struck me as very familiar because that's how it was when I was a kid growing up, watching the same kinds of documentaries.
Yeah.
And then I thought about news programs or travel programs like the Globe Trekker that features countries in Asia or Africa, and they interviewed people like Western expatriates living there or backpackers having their adventures into those countries. And those books over there, Lonely Planet, I can bet you most of the ones on African countries or Asian countries are written by mostly Western, usually white people. So, to what extent is the problem that you're diagnosing a legacy of colonialism versus something that's more unique?
Yeah. I mean, I actually describe in the first full chapter of the book, how various the history of like databases, and like seeing databases not just in the kind of IBM's creation of database, but in the legacies and histories of the Enlightenment, a time when much of the world was colonized by European countries. And so I describe how the other, right? Like the other being like the places and communities and cultures from which objects and entities and knowledge was taken and extracted, how the other was kind of reorganized according to the logic of the colonizer, right? Because Enlightenment knowledge, it's incredibly complex, but basically, was built upon certain types of ideas of how information is to be ordered and presented and classified. Specifically, I'm thinking about classification. So, like on every level, yes, on every level. I can't disagree. However, there is something incredibly powerful also, and like we all know that, about digital technology, about network technology, about its ability to rapidly activate and mobilize large numbers of people to spread information so largely. The Zapatista example he mentioned, like the way things blew up but then somehow got forgotten with the Arab Spring, right? Like there are these moments, right? Like with Black Lives Matter right now, like it's very huge on social media. So there are these capacities for groups and cultures and communities to take hold of these network technologies, because the network technologies themselves are not necessarily tools of the West, right, or tools of the colonizer, right? I mean, sure, the people that created and owned and monetized and tend to manipulate these technologies tend to be, the rich elites. But there are different actors, so it's complex in that phenomena. But what we do know is that there's a really interesting mirroring of existing inequalities in the world that occur when you look at the digital world, right? There's a reason why, like, rent is so expensive in San Francisco right now, right? There's a reason why so many startups and so many tech companies, or like in Venice, right? Like, it's like similar, right? Venice Beach. There's a reason why, the venture capital companies that fund Silicon Valley tend to also be in Silicon Valley, right? Like, place still matters. There's a reason why Bangalore in India has blown up the way it has, right? There are these network nodes of that mirror various systems of inequality. So it's not a one-to-one relationship, it's a refraction. That's like what I kind of argue in the book. It's like passing a light through some prism and then it spreads in new ways, but the source of the light still matters. Yeah.
So taking it to the macro level, because that's where I want to go with my question. I think that's more away from
Do you want to? Yeah.
where you're trying to.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I want everybody here.
Taking it to the macro level, which is where you went, which is where my question was coming from. So I'm looking at capital move through these information systems. I'm looking at Venice. I'm looking at Snapchat, a failing company that is now in auction for billions. You also mentioned the hedge fund manager whose system information...
Robert Mercer, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hedge fund means that's the paradigm of wealth while you sleep. That's the paradigm of wealth being accrued away from us. So these people in Venice, right, these kids, this work core, right, they're looking at longtime artists who are wearing T-shirts. They have T-shirts, these protest movements that are occurring on the streets of Venice, long-term residents, affordable living people. They're looking at this with kind of affection and awe of their parents. Isn't it quaint what they're doing here? Isn't it sweet? They're not acknowledging the new world, but they're in protest of this happening. It's just indulgent kind of maneuvering that they're viewing this with. How do you square that with this article I read on Silicon Beach in the New Yorker, and Remnick and Cassidy and some of these writers doing the best journalism, right? Yeah. Okay. So these are the people who are in charge of overthrowing our government right now, which will be done. We see it happening, and who are in this information fight to get the truth across and bring the real world back to us, and they will prevail. But at the same time, capital is moving in this vein, which is really actually working against us. So what's the upshot of that? Will this younger elite workforce be looking indulgently at their parents protesting on the street and still taking over the world, still limiting us to lower and lower economic levels? What is the upshot of that young, inexperienced elite workforce, that group of people in charge of the world, in charge of real estate? What are they going to do to us?
I mean, that's an amazing question, revolutionary question there.
And you're one.
Yeah, I mean, I see myself in solidarity with all these movements and communities that I write about, for sure, and write with. A lot of these, I should say that, a lot of the pieces, a lot of the publications that have come out of my research are authored with my community partners. And that's really important, you know. I think, insofar as it's possible, the engineers and young labor force that are populating these tech companies, there's not too many of them necessarily, even though they're expanding massively. There's a big labor issue that's going on with Silicon Valley, right? Like with Instagram, sold for over $1 billion with 14 employees, right when Kodak went bankrupt with tens of thousands of employees on a macroeconomic level. That's an issue. I think, I have a hopeful perspective as well, which is that there needs to be ways in which the movements that you stand for, and then many of us sort of feel a kinship with, can be articulated with those young, brainy kids that are incredibly taking positions of incredible power over how technologies are designed and rolled out. I do believe that, as flawed as it was in some ways, the Zuckerberg Manifesto was partly a reaction to the incredible amount of criticism he's getting from a lot of us after what's been going down. I mean, it took till this, this moment, which is not the happiest of ones, but like. Yeah, well, Zuckerberg was, there's a bunch of things, right? They're going to correct their trending topics to not privilege. They want to standardize them more. That's not necessarily a solution, but it's better in some ways. They're also going to try to do more verification on content. Because we know there's incredible exposés about fake news and where it comes from and all this stuff, right? They're going to do some of that. They're going to try to open us up to visualize some of the choices around which content was selected, which is what I've been arguing for. They say that, at least. So there are some ways. So, I mean, my answer, it's a very simplistic answer, but it's just like the more we communicate with these folks, because like I could have been one of them, like I was in those worlds, some of my friends are in that world still, the more they understand the political and cultural dynamics that are being created by these systems, I think that there's a space to build together. I really do. I think the ones that are a little more out there have maybe gone off the deep end, but I think most people are not that way. I want to take this book to Google. I want it. That's what I want. Like I want this to be part of like our technology worlds as well. That's my goal.
If I can address that question as a dialoguer, and kind of going back to what you had said as well, like remember this interview with the Chinese Minister of Economy, and he says, we know that civil engineers build buildings, for instance, build bridges, electronic engineers build machines, electric engineers build this, mechanical engineers build engines, and they all get compensated sort of better than other professionals. But what do financial engineers build? That they get compensated so much more than all other kinds of engineers. So I think that once the old-fashioned ways of plundering become unattainable, like colonialism, invasion, you got to figure out new ways. So I think that the founders and owners of these high-tech companies are all another form of engineers, and they're plundering actually individuals. Like you said, Facebook is worth 1.8 billion human beings. So then if you're getting it, like somebody said, if you're getting a service and the service is free, that means that the product is you. So I think that in a way these companies are in fact perpetuating a new wave of like colonialism and invasion, but they're going for the human beings rather than the territory.
It's a reminder. Remember the Time cover, like the person of the year was you, like a few years ago? Yeah. Yes, Paul. Yeah.
Great stuff.
Awesome, thank you. Can you speak up as loudly as you can?
Oh, okay.
This thing won't reach,
I was wondering if you don't have a documentary called Hyperurbanization. And you talked about that the internet is going to be a place in the future where it's going to be the Wild West, where all the villains can hang out. Our goal is to take over the institutions. Because what I see the problem is why don't people have a computer? Why don't people create their own internet, their own ways of communicating?
Oh, yeah, thank you for saying that.
Why is it just them? And I totally hear your point. the colonization of the mind. It wasn't a dating app that turned into a place where you talk to your own friends, and now I'm realizing there's another section of Facebook that just sells products that seems to pop up on my app all the time. So there you go. So my question would be, what do you think of, like, look, news, we go away from news because the institutions have been co-opted by corporate interests, right? So we go to online media because we think we're going to get alternative information, and we don't anymore. So we need to go and take over the institutions, I think.
Yeah.
Not scared of taking power.
I mean, that's great, and and so like isn't it a really weird moment, right? Because like a lot of us were critical of like the news media, right? And now the news media is sort of like aligning with these because they have had the rugs, thrown out from under them all of a sudden. This gave me an opportunity, Paul, to talk about this project that I'm working on that is like super, super interesting and inspiring. It's in the Oaxaca region of Mexico. It's an incredibly diverse set of communities there, Zapotec, Mixtec, and Mixe communities. Dozens of languages spoken there, very biodiverse. And these communities have been disenfranchised, and this is like where I'm going with my work, and I think it's connected to what you're saying. These communities have been disenfranchised by telecommunication systems because they don't have enough money, there are not enough people, they live in cloud forests, right? Like, and so these guys they don't want like Facebook, but they want mobile phones. And why do they want mobile phones? Because they can partly because they can practice their own language, which have never been written down. Zapotec languages have been written, but like not a lot, and they partly because of colonialism, right? I mean, directly, straight up. So instead, and so the telecom companies, Telcel and Telmex, were like, we're not gonna, it's not gonna happen, or we're gonna charge you like N times more than what a wealthy urban person would be charged. And these are the history of telecommunications in the United States as well as had these. So they're creating their own cooperative. They're building their own networks. They're building their own towers. They're setting up their own infrastructures, and these are collectives. They're collectively owned. So, like, I love this kind of stuff because this is a re-articulation of cultural, political, and economic sovereignty, right, over network technology. It's not just about like, oh crap, like Facebook isn't serving my interests. It's like, well, let's re-engineer stuff. And so like the process and the subtlety of how you think about building those kinds of networks is amazing. And so these guys, that's my friend Peter Bloom with some Zapotec elders, like he's trying to spread this thing all over the world. And it's actually in this weird moment, networks can be helpful, right? Because Al Jazeera Plus did a piece on this, and so this actually globalizes the awareness, right? This is like what the internet can be good for spreading information rapidly. So it kind of globalizes the awareness of this amazing project, and like it's also it's like a memory that like very few people know. Professor Livra, my colleague, has written about this, where, like phone telephony in the United States was like cooperative. Y'all know that? Like it were rural cooperatives that owned and managed and built, or not built, but like basically assembled their own telephone networks. So like technology can take on those manifestations. It's just right now it's like it's slipped out. Yeah. Shama.
Thanks. So a lot of where we choose to put our power is through our money, right? And where we choose to spend money. And I speak not only as an individual, but someone who works with businesses and marketing and business and money, right? And so there's a need, right, in terms of as an individual to be able to use our money in different ways that support our own causes, but how much of that is going to be self-interest, right? So how we choose to spend our money. And in terms of technology, and I guess more relevant, as an individual and living our day-to-day lives and not being able to necessarily make, huge protests or be so activated, what are things that we can do? Right, not only in terms of individuals, but also as small businesses, right, and as people who have to survive in a highly global, highly competitive marketplace where these big Breitbarts and all these people actually not only skew information, but make it a lot more expensive for a lot of my clients and, my friends who have businesses to even, compete on that, right? So if we're not them and we're us, right, what do we do?
Well, I mean, this is just my opportunity to mention how like into Bernie Sanders I was, which is like I'm going to join. But I don't know why your question gave me Bernie Sanders as an answer, and I'll tell you why. It's because that was a movement. You know, whatever its flaws might be for some of you, that was a movement that was pretty decentralized in lots of ways, right? Like people were giving small amounts of money, they were coming together around certain causes, and it almost succeeded, right? And so like I think about like the ecosystem of businesses and organizations similarly. Like if they can stand for social causes, right? Like right here, like I hope I thanked Skylight because they're so awesome. This is such an awesome bookstore, right? Like, can I just say that? They've been raising money for Standing Rock. Right, like this is a business, right? A business that I hope is making money, but they're raising money for these causes. So, like, I think, you know, in this moment where like so many values and causes are being attacked and assaulted, I think we should not give in to the hysteria that's being produced by that, which is amplified by Facebook, right? It's amplified by Facebook, and instead start thinking about every action that we take and how it can support some notion of ethics, and that it comes from our heart. It doesn't have to come from the dogma of Bernie Sanders or a political party or anybody else, right? It comes from our heart, and I know you do that because you're my wife. You know? That's why I got the tough question.
Okay, I just want to say, because your book basically is questioning these tools that most of us are thinking of them as like, how can this tool help me? Right? And you're going like, what is actually the nature of this tool, and what?
That's
right. How might it be working against us? And as we're talking about corporations and companies, I thought of Fela Kuti, right? The great Fela Kuti, who had a song called ITT. Right, International Thief, which then became AT&T. You know, so I was thinking, if Fela Kuti was making music today, instead of saying "follow me on Twitter" or "follow me on Facebook," I bet you'd be saying, "Chase Twitter out of my town, chase Facebook out of my village, chase Google out of here, man. Follow me." Yeah, right. So, like, you know, who is making songs about the real meaning of Google, you know? Fella had it clear. International thief, right?
I have to take some others. Yeah, no, but I will talk to... Professor Libra.
I'm just going to observe that several of the questions, and I think you can also speak to this. One of the things that's very interesting right now, that may be an opportunity in this very difficult moment, is suggested by several of the questions, I think, and that is looking for unusual alliances. And being sensitive to the fact that if you get out of your bubble, if you don't just kind of reinforce the same sort of things, you might be open, in fact, using the technologies to find something surprising and find that Bernie Sanders, I think, was popular in many reasons because he was smart about seeing across that wasn't traditional lines. And I think that appealed to people even if it's articulated. So I think one of the things that the technologies and community technologies, cooperative technologies might allow us to do is to look for those unusual places. You know, I was talking with another one of our colleagues the other day. She says, who would have thought in our lifetime, she and I are saying, that we would think now, okay, who's on the right side of things? The CIA and the Pope? And I think this is what we have to say. Well, of course it's not the CIA, but some of them, just as we have with Trump.
They're leaking. They're leaking.
They got big tools. So, just being open to these new differences. Maybe some of you have heard the idea that maybe left-right isn't a big question anymore, it's open close. And the question of what kind of openness, what sorts of connections. If we're going to take networks seriously, that's what it is. And so maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the question of alliance.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just said it incredibly well. I mean, there are these moments now, right? Like there's a space that's opened up for a lot of for new formations, right? And I think I think it's because, you know, these systems of that have produced so much inequality have sort of run their course, right? I mean, hopefully, sort of Frankenstein's emerged out of that, right? and I think quite a bit about how various leaders today have tried to show points of agreement that people can get around. And I actually also think, Ralph Nader wrote a book about this just recently, right? About I forgot the title of it, but it was basically about how aspects of the left and right are not actually left and right. They're actually just people and communities that can agree on certain things. I think we just got to start there, and we have to build movements around those things, And I think that otherwise the thunder of sort of dissent will be stolen from us by these institutionalized mechanisms of power and co-optation. Yeah.
It is a time of institutional rearrangement and to some extent breakdown. And the idea that people might start reading the New York Times again in paper is an interesting question.
Yeah.
But it's at those inflection points where things begin to kind of fall apart.
Yeah.
Right? That glorious, that brightness, but then opportunity.
Yeah.
Opportunity for new alignments.
And this is exactly like what my friends in Egypt were telling me, right? Like in early 2011 when I was there, right? Like I basically was watching this go down. I, like my colleague Leah Livra, we both are really interested in relationships between technologies, media, and activism. And I was seeing this go down, and I went there, and people were like, things had gotten so bad that gave us the opportunities to do this. And what is this is not defined as just people protesting in a simplistic way. It's all these new formations, all of these new ways of building mobilization. And yeah, institutional power and hegemonic power kind of cut it off in 2013. But this is a process, This is a process, and so I hope for that here. Yeah, Sunday.
Thank you. So I'm an educator. I teach high school English, and it's really interesting, even being not too much older than the students, the way that they use technology is really fascinating to me, and even to the point where they have so much access to both myself, to a lot of information, and knowing a little bit about everything. And then I see with them only seeing it as a way to connect, but then being so disconnected in a communal space. And so it's the beginning of class when we haven't gotten started and they're on their phones and they're chatting and everything, and it's so loud, and I'm so frustrated. It's so loud. But then when it's time to sit down and talk about a topic that's relevant to them and important, it's completely silent, and so there's no kind of way of connecting. And so it's really heartbreaking sometimes. And so right now I'm grappling with how to break those down and kind of bring this sense of community back to the way that we learn. And so in thinking about technology, I'm thinking about what are the ways in which we can reteach community and culture and have technology be a part of that, because it is so much a part of their existence, right? So there's not the sense of removing it, but how do we relearn and reshape how technology exists for them that doesn't pull them away from one another, but more so reminds them of the actual connections that they have besides, how many people they Snapchat and Snapchatting each other in class, but then not talking to each other face to face.
Right.
And so
that's such a great question. So it's really about how do we kind of collectively use technology in the process of collective learning and learning from one another. And it's that's kind of what I was seeing happening, but more people and communities claiming technology in those two examples I showed, the one from Tahrir Square and the one with my Zuni friends. There's my friend Jay does a lot of work on this, right? He's a media arts teacher in LAUSD in South LA. But it's basically what is technology, right? It's just anything by which we create different worlds and possibilities. That's all. It's the instantiation of possibility. And so there are so many amazing examples, right, of how people can collectively create and design and learn through technology, right? So like, I'll give you like one example. I don't even know if this is the best example, but I mean, when I was in graduate school, there was, even though I was kind of criticizing some parts of like my experience, we were also doing some awesome stuff with kids in schools where we were all together like designing like interactive like Lego robotic technologies, right? Like where the kids were learning how to build processing and computing power into like I'm talking like Lego Mindstorms and stuff like that. This is like relates to this theory that we call social constructionism, where people come together to construct and design phenomena, and through that process they learn from each other and they build their own bonds. And so like I really believe, I do believe that that's what's happening to some extent in this project, right? In this project. I mean, these guys are together kind of building and designing their own network infrastructures, and it's not necessarily they're not building and designing solely to achieve an end. That's part of it, but the process itself of like collectively building and designing is like part of what makes it amazing. So I just think we can I want to keep thinking about this. I think we together can think of many examples where people and communities came together around something that involves technology, but it wasn't about technology, right? It was about technology as a mediating artifact. That's the word we use in academia. But basically, it's a platform of collective expression. And I just want to remind folks of this. It's like, remember, like Facebook, it started as a community network. I'm not saying it was like the dream network, but it was a Harvard community network. It was and like the earliest online communities were like the Well. Do you all know that one? It's like hippies in Marin County. Deadheads, John Perry Barlow and people like that, right? Like he played drums in the Grateful Dead, right? Like, or he's stand-in, huh? Lyricist. Oh, he's the lyricist of the Grateful Dead. So like, I mean, these tend to be elite white communities. Like, let's say that too, right? Like, so like I'm not saying that like this is the way to go or like some great examples, but I'm just trying to say that like there are always possibilities for like us to think about anything digital or not in a collective way. Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
I'll just say that.
Yeah. You can take
describing,
Actually, let's give it to him this way. I want everybody to hear this. Sorry.
The way you were describing, you made the work that you're doing right now about Robert Mercer and Steve Bannon, the whole sort of Breitbart kind of weaponizing of the internet, or network technologies in general, I guess. I'm curious if you think that there's a fundamental difference in how network technologies have been functioning before that. Like, are they doing anything fundamentally different than how advertising has worked?
That's a great question. I mean, you were saying like when I was like reading this article about Mercer and like data analytics, and there's a group called Cambridge Analytica that is worth all of you checking out. Maybe with VPN or encryption, I think it's very similar to what marketers have always been doing. I just think the sophistication and the scale of the analysis is that much higher. I just think that there is an incredibly important moment. It's really interesting. Like if you look at like what Obama was doing with data during the 2008 election, it was about data analysis on a very like high level of granularity, but like place-based data, right? Like data, like this community, all I have to do is put these resources in and I'll get them to turn like my side versus McCain's side, right? But now this data analysis, I believe that some of the most sophisticated social media marketing firms are probably doing this kind of stuff, but this data analysis is about data across networks. It's like what people are doing online. But remember, it's not like just online, right? Like I like to say this. Edward Snowden made the point that when this is on airplane mode, and it's not on airplane mode right now, it's gathering data about you. So there's so much data that's being gathered about us. I think it's being used, of course, by technology companies. But then if there are political actors who are trying to weaponize these phenomena, then it moves into a much more, like even more sinister space, if you will. And So I think it's continuous with what's happening. I think part of the story of every political movement, at least in the Western world, where there's a technology saturation kind of phenomena, is a story of internet and internet manipulation. So I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.